Yo guys, what is going on? Blossom is back and I want to answer an age-old question today. What is the coolest car to ever exist? And in order to do so, I need to make a change. That's more like it. Okay, so today I have 30 cars lined up in this tier list and I want to see what is the coolest car to ever exist. You can say that this is a part 1 because when I was making this list, it kind of made me realize, wow, there are a lot of badass cars out there. But today I want to see what is the most badass car I have in this current list that I have made. Now, I want to let you know that once again, I made this list. So every car in here, I personally think is really freaking cool. So the lowest rarity or the lowest rank that I'm actually going to give any of these cars is cool. But what is the coolest of them all? So here are the tier lists that we got today. We got cool, and then we got badass, then we got stone cold killer, then we have ice cold assassin, because we all know that ice cold is colder than stone cold, and assassin is more badass than a killer, because if you're a killer, people might know that you are a killer, but if you're an assassin, not everybody will know you're an assassin. Those that know that you're an assassin won't be around for much longer. Oh, it's cold like that. And last but not least, personal operatives. Think about it this way. If you were a main villain, if you were the main super villain of a feature film, what would be your daily? That is basically what I want to find out today. What would be my daily? What would be the coldest of the cars, the most badass cars? Now, you can participate. I want to know what your opinions are. I will have this tier list public and the link will be in the description below. Feel free to do it yourself. Send me an image on Instagram on how you would rank these cars. At the end of the video, I will also be showing you what my Patrons thought, because some of them shared it, and also my cousin who doesn't know anything about cars, and I think that's just really funny. But anyway, without further ado, I gotta say, as always, this is my personal opinion. Please don't get angry if I put a car that you like in a tier that you don't like, but all these tiers are good, to be fair. So anyway, let us begin. The first car is going to be the Pontiac Firebird Trans Am. Where am I going to put the Pontiac Firebird Trans Am, the car known from, you know, Smokey and the Bandit, although this isn't the exact model. This is a slightly different model. Now, this car is iconic. It is incredibly iconic, you know, because of its windows and also because of the Firebird on the hood, the black and the gold, that always fits super well together. I think I'm gonna put in Stone Cold Killer. This car is it irradiates badassery, but so much badassery that is more badass than badass. It's a Stone Cold Killer. Okay, next up on the list with the Chevy Impala. Now, the 1965 Chevy Impala is an icon. You know, if you're an OG, you probably got one riding around. You know, Snoop Dogg had like two. I think there were two 65 Chevy Impalas at the Super Bowl halftime show. Lowriders, obviously. The car is amazing. The thing about the Impala, though, is yes, there is that badass side of it, you know, the gangster car, but then there's also like that, you know, oh, convertible, white walls, light blue, driven by pretty blonde girls, you know what I mean? Like, it's a stereotype, but it's a stereotype for a reason. So there is a badass version of the Impala, but then there's also like this like wholesome, beautiful American classic vibe, which is still a really good thing. But like I said, if you're a supervillain, what car are you going to be driving around in? You want a car that is 100% just cool. So I think I'm putting cool, ironically saying, because I don't think it's like incredibly badass, but it's still really, really cool. All right, next up we have the Mercedes SL55. Now, this was one of the coolest cars for me growing up. I grew up with Mercedes. I love Mercedes. A lot of you might know that my favorite car is the 420 SEL or the 560 SEC. Well, my favorite German Mercedes, at least. Not a German car. My favorite German car is a 959. But the SL55 is ridiculously cool. If I was a cocaine dealer, I would be driving in an SL55. So if you ever see me in an SL55, then you probably know that I've changed professions. That being said, though, we're not talking about the car that I would pick if I was a cocaine dealer. We're picking the car if I was like, you know, not even a drug lord, but a super villain, like I want to rule the world kind of situation. I think it's a badass car, but I wouldn't put it any higher than the Pontiac Firebird. All right, next up, the Camaro Z11L. Now, this car, whenever I think of an aggressive car, I always think of the Z11L. It is like, you know, some of these cars like the Impala or the Pontiac, they got history, right? They got history, they got, you know, movies that are featured in the ZL11L. Not really, it's a relatively new car, there's not much history around it. I would say that on a superficial level, the ZL11L is probably the most badass car in existence, you know what I mean? Like, you don't need to tell anyone about the history of the Camaro. You don't need to tell anyone about if it comes in manual or not. You don't need to tell anyone about the engine. I don't even know what engine, I don't know if it's turbocharged or naturally aspirated, but I always think naturally aspirated is a bit cooler. But the ZL11L, you don't need that detail, you know what I mean? People look at it and they're already like, wow, this car is freaking amazing. The thing is, right, it looks really, really aggressive, and I love that, but a bit too aggressive to be an ice cold assassin, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, look at me, I'm incredibly cool, but you know it because I look that way. You know, the coolest cars are the ones that do look cool, but they don't want to shout at you saying, hey, I'm cool, and this car is kind of shouting at you, hey, look at me, I'm badass, and it does it very well, but it doesn't make it the coolest one on the list. Okay. Next one is the RollsRoyce Black Badge. Now, the Black Badge makes it even more badass than it already is. I think it's a really, really cool car. It has a really cool name. It's kind of like, you know, if someone had a name of like Louis Alexander Paquette the Fourth or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's very cool. But you also know that it's cool. It is nothing else than cool. It is also very luxurious. I wouldn't say that this is a car that I would daily as a supervillain. This would be a car that maybe I would drive to formal events from time to time. I wouldn't drive, I'll be sitting in the back seat. But I want to drive the car. I wouldn't be driving this car. I think it's cool. I think it's cool. Black Badge makes it a little bit more cool, but you know, I don't think it's like as badass as an SL55. Next one, the Lotus Esprit. I mean, that just looks amazing. Pop-up headlights for one. The first car on the list with pop-up headlights. Don't worry, there are more to come. Yeah, this thing, I've always loved the design of this. And one thing that I absolutely love about the SL55 are those AMG rims. And the Esprit has very, very similar ones. It's a very beautiful car. It is, oh man, Stone Cold Killer or Ice Cold Assassin. I'm going to put it in Stone Cold Killer. I wouldn't daily it as a supervillain, but I would have it in my garage. Next up on the list is the Blackwing, the Cadillac. Now, this one is a cool car. I love what it represents. I love that it comes in manual as well, but it's the opposite of the ZL11L. You know what I mean? The ZL11L, you look at it and you think it's cool. The Cadillac, you look at it and you don't think it's cool. You need to know more about it. You need to know the fact that, oh, it's, you know, one of the few saloons you can get in the world right now to still in manual. You know what I mean? This and I think the M4, at least in the US. I'm not sure about anywhere else, but this car is ridiculously cool, but you need to know it first. It doesn't look that way. It looks like a, I think it's too far to say granny car, but definitely I just say it's cool. It's cool. All right, next up, 996 911 GT2. Oh my god. Look, man, this is one of the coolest cars in my life. Growing up, like I said, I grew up with a lot of these early 2000 cars or late 90s cars, so SL55 for example, and obviously the 996. This was probably one of my favorite cars growing up, and it still is the same way today. This thing is so freaking cool. Yes, there is a side of me that thinks, oh, the first time I see this car, I would think, oh, it's a supercar, or at least it used to be a supercar. Maybe now it's kind of the stats of a sport car, but you know, back in the day, in the early 2000s, this was a supercar, and like, yeah, there is a reputation of it just being fast and not cool per se, but I always thought growing up that this car was absolutely amazing, and I'm gonna put it in personal operation. Honestly, if I was a supervillain, I want to drive a 996 GT2. Yeah, maybe some of my, you know, competition, they might laugh at me because Friday headlights. You know what? I think embracing the Friday headlights and thinking they're absolutely cool because they are just makes it even cooler. So yeah, personal operatives for sure. Next one, Lamborghini LM002 Rambo Lambo. I mean, it's called Rambo Lambo for a reason. I like it. I do like how it looks. I like the vibe that it gives. But really, I would just put it in badass. I would never daily the Rambo Lambo. If anything, that would be the perfect henchman car for me. But in my personal opinion, I think it's badass. I think it's definitely cooler than cool, but I don't think it's cooler than the ZL11L or the Pontiac, and definitely not the Porsche. Next one, the Mazda. Oi! Okay, Mazda RX-7 is a very, very special car. It is in my opinion, an ice cold assassin. It's so cool, and it doesn't even look that aggressive. You know what I mean? Like the Z11L, yeah, it's really badass. I'm gonna say this word a lot, by the way. If you take a shot every time I say badass in this video, you're not gonna get out of here alive. But yeah, the RX-7 in my opinion is what the Z11L is, but it looks more like stealthy. You know what I mean? I've always like respected the car because it always looked like a Japanese Viper to me, and I love my Vipers. Surprisingly, there's not a single Viper on this list, but don't get me wrong, I think they're badass. It's just that if I had every badass car in this list, it'd be too long. But yeah, I think it's an ice cold assassin. This is a car that, you know, it comes with a reputation. You know what I mean? Someone doesn't just pick an RX-7. You know, someone has to know that they have to know cars. They have to know that they, I don't know how to explain it, you know what I mean? Like when you think of a Japanese car, everybody thinks of the Skyline right away. You know what? That's the mainstream car. And it's cool, don't get me wrong. I think it's really, really cool. And even within Skylines within themselves, they're different tiers, you know what I mean? Like the Stone Cold Killer would probably not go for the R35. That's too mainstream. He would go for the R33 or maybe the R32. You know what I mean? The R34, everybody wants an R34. You know what I mean? But the Mazda is like one step above all those Skylines in terms of how cool it is. You know what I mean? It really makes you stand out with a car that doesn't look like it's meant to stand out, if that makes sense. It's an ice cold assassin. Next up on the list, Pontiac Trans Am, the 1989 version. I think that this is the coolest generation of Trans Am, even cooler than the one from the early 80s. I think the late 80s one is the coolest one. I think it's called like an F body or whatever it's in, D body. I can't remember what letter, but it's always super cool. And obviously, you know, the fact that this was the car that was used, the model that was used to represent Kit from Knight Rider, makes it even more cooler. Yeah, the Trans Am is an ice cold assassin. Next up is the Mercury Cougar. Now the Mercury Cougar works in a way similar to the Mazda RX-7. You know what I mean? When you think of American muscle, Mercury isn't the first brand that comes to your mind. So it's understated in that sense. That being said, the competition for the Mercury is just way too much. I can name you at least 10 muscle cars cooler than the Mercury. You know what I mean? That being said, the Mercury Cougar is still a very badass car. It's just that I can't rank it in the top ranks because I can think of other muscle cars that are cooler. But the fact that it's from a non-mainstream brand does boost its appeal a bit. I love how it looks, and it has quote-unquote pop-up headlights. They do, you know, flick around. I think it's badass. Definitely cooler than cool. Next up, the Di Tommaso Pantera, the quintessential Di Tommaso in my opinion. What makes it so special is, you know, it's everybody's go-to car when it comes to every like synthwave YouTube video on the planet. But what makes a Di Tommaso even more special is that whenever you ask someone to name you a Di Tommaso, they're going to think of the Pantera. You can't say that for Ferrari. You ask any car person, what is the first Ferrari you think of? Some people might say F40, some people might say Enzo, some people might say LaFerrari, some people might say Testarossa, some people might say the Dino even, or the Dino. The Di Tommaso is different in a sense where you ask someone to name a Di Tommaso and they are going to say Pantera at least 95% of the time. And really making it like the flagship car of the company, and this is a car that is decades old now, really brings an appeal to it. The main question is this: do I find the Di Tommaso Pantera cooler than the Lotus, as cool as the Lotus, or not as cool as the Lotus? I think they're pretty similar. Both of them stone cold killer in my opinion. Next one, the GMC Sierra All-Terrain X. I think it's cool. I just think it's cool. I can't name it higher than cool. The fact of the matter is the name All-Terrain X. It's trying too hard to be cool. There's nothing subtle about it. It's trying too hard to be an ice cold assassin, I should say, because I think it is a cool car. I love how it comes in all black, and I love how it looks. It is basically like the King. Oh, this one's gonna anger some people. The King Ford F-150. But it's not as cool as a Raptor! So, yeah, I think it's cool, but I'm not gonna rank it higher than that. Next one is the Ferrari Daytona. Ice cold assassin, bro. Ice cold assassin. That car speaks for itself. Alright, Maserati Quattroporte. I like the name. I love the design. But then you kind of realize, oh, wait a minute. It's a Maserati, and everything badass about it just gets into shatters. So the highest I can give it is cool. I still like how it looks. I still like how it sounds. I still like the name. But then you realize, oh, wait a minute. It's a Maserati. Alright, next up. Oh, the BMW CSI. Pop-up headlights. One of the coolest BMWs ever made. Will I daily it as a supervillain? I would not. But I definitely think it's an ice cold assassin. I think it is one of the coolest German cars ever made. Yeah, definitely ice cold assassin. I love everything about it. It looks so understated. It looks like it doesn't go fast, but it kind of does. Not really fast, but it's just really, really cool. I love the car. All right, next up on the list, Porsche 930 911. Yeah, personal op. Will I daily it? Absolutely. Is it kind of like a Nissan GTR situation where it's overused in movies? Little bit. But unlike the GTR, I'm not sick of seeing it everywhere. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of movies uses the 930 911, but I never get sick of it. It is just ridiculously ice cold. It is one of the coolest cars to ever exist in the world, and I can say this. I will say this in 20 years from now. I'll say this 30 years from now. The 930 911 just hits different. All right, next up, the Cadillac Escalade, specifically the one from 2010. In my opinion, I think that the Cadillac Escalade is the coolest SUV ever. It's cooler than any Hellcat Durango. It's cooler than any Trackhawk. And once again, much like the Porsche 930, I'm never going to be sick of it. I can see it in a million TV shows. I can see it in a million movies. This exact generation of Escalade, I will never get sick of. This will be the only SUV I will choose to drive if I was a supervillain. Now, I do want to let you know, for personal operatives, the highest rank, I'm only going to be limiting it to 5 cars. So we've already seen 3 out of the 5. Next up is the Callaway. Now, the Callaway is the daddy Corvette. It is the top dog C4. It is a ridiculously cool car. And the name, Sledgehammer, come on, son. This thing is more than badass. But I do not think it operates on the same level as a Ferrari Daytona or an 850 CSI or a Mazda RX-7. I think that it is a stone cold killer, and it should be proud that it is there. Alright, moving on. The Apollo Intenza Emozione. One of the coolest cars to ever exist. At least one of the coolest looking cars to ever exist. If I remember correctly, I know for a fact that it is a V12. But if I do remember correctly, I think it is also naturally aspirated, which makes it even more cooler. Now, every supervillain should have a supercar in their garage. And a lot of you might think that the Apollo Intenza Emozione would be the supercar that I would choose. The answer is right. Yeah, I'll put it in the top 5. Honestly, like, I know that it doesn't have that history of a Ferrari F40 or something like that, but that's because it hasn't had the time to sit and sizzle. The F40 has had its time. The Apollo Intenza Emozione, I mean, what, it was made in like 2019? Give it a couple decades, I promise you, that'll be one of the coolest supercars to ever exist. I think it looks cooler than any hypercar in the market. It looks cooler than any Koenigsegg. It looks cooler, yeah, I said that by the way. It looks cooler than any Pagani. It looks cooler than any Ferrari or Lamborghini. The Apollo Intenza Emozione is like the Batmobile, but if Batman was a supervillain, if that makes any sense. It's too cool. Cobra, Shelby Cobra is next. If anything, one of the coolest muscle cars ever made. I love the, you know, exposed side exhausts. I always think that, honestly, exposed side exhaust, that's a turn on for me. I know no woman on the planet will ever have exposed side exhaust, which is sad because that is sexy. I would put in Ice Cold Assassin. The only reason why I'm not putting it in personal operatives is that there's always a part of me that thinks, oh, it's also a muscle car. Which, like, it's really cool, but we're talking about the coldest of cars over here. And a part of me still thinks that, oh, it's a muscle car, it makes loud sound, and I want to have fun in it. You know? I don't just want to put on aviators and cruise in it all the time. So I'll put in Ice Cold Assassin. Next up is, of course, the Ferrari F40. A lot of people will put the Ferrari F40 on the top of their list, without a doubt. But like I said, this is my personal list. I don't think that the Ferrari F40, I know, kill me. The Ferrari F40, man, I think is a stone cold killer. I don't even think it's an ice cold assassin. It is an amazing hypercar, but it definitely isn't a car that I'm going to daily if I'm a supervillain. In terms of looks, sheer looks alone, the 930 Porsche is way cooler. I know I'm gonna piss people off by saying that, but like I said, is my opinion. I think that the 930 Porsche is going to be cooler. I mean, not going to be, it looks cooler than the F40. Next up, we have the Porsche 959. I think it's an ice cold assassin. Why? Is because when you think about it, the Porsche 959 is kind of like the Mercury Cougar in a sense where it looks very understated. It's a bit of a sleeper car. It's not like a Lamborghini Huracan where it's kind of like, oh, look at me! I have triangles everywhere. I'm trying to look aggressive and cool. You know, kind of like the Z11L, and it's cool. Don't get me wrong. I think it's still really badass. I think an Aventador SVJ is still very badass. But there is a subtlety factor that puts all these cars in Ice Cold Assassin. Look at every single car that I put in Ice Cold Assassin. Not a single one of them looks incredibly aggressive. You know what I mean? Not any one of them looks like a Camaro ZL11L or a Rambo Lambo. All of these cars are understated in some sense in their design, and there's obviously a reason for that. I think it's an ice cold assassin. Next up is the Jaguar XJ220. To me, it's just badass. I don't know, when I think about the Jaguar XJ220, it is a very strong contender to be a supervillain car, but in all honesty, it isn't the first cars I think of when I think of badass. I think of this as a work of art. I think of the Jaguar XJ220 as a work of art. I think of it as a car that I kind of want to display in my living room, not even drive, which is quite sad, honestly. But in my opinion, it is badass. And in the last car I have on this list, this is the coolest car I think has ever existed of all time. See, like, I know I didn't even say that correctly in a sentence. I think this is the coolest car ever made. This is the most badass looking car to ever exist on the planet. Can you guess what it is? It's surprisingly not a 69 Charger. The 69 Charger is my favorite car of all time, and I think it is very badass, but kind of like the Camaro Z11L, it's not super understated. This car that I'm about to show you, comment down below what you think it's going to be. I personally think that this is the coolest car to ever exist and will ever exist. The coolest car in the world, in my opinion, is the Buick GNX, baby! Dude, that car is way too cool. If I was a supervillain, that will be the car that I daily without a doubt. Being a badass car doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go fast. Being a badass car just means you need to irradiate ice cold in your veins, bro. Seriously, the GNX, anybody could be driving that and I would have nothing but respect for you. And that's why when I first saw cars, Chick Hicks was my favorite character until he attacked the king, who ended up being my favorite character. But yeah, Chick Hicks, because I knew, and I was 6 years old when cars came out, I knew that Chick Hicks was a Buick GNX, and since that age I've always thought that the Buick GNX is the coolest car to ever bloody exist. The fact that it's boxy but not too boxy, you know, the fact that it's just I don't know how to explain it, but those five are definitely like my top five. Like, if I was a supervillain, my daily would be the GNX, my weekend car would be the 930 or the GT2, and obviously every supervillain is gonna have an SUV, right? That would be the Escalade in my opinion. And last but not least, the Apollo would be kind of like my supervillain track car or my club car, or, you know, if I really want to flex, I'll take it out. But really, you don't need to flex with an Apollo IE if you've got yourself a Buick GNX, dude. That car is too freaking cool. Coolest car ever. But anyway, guys, that is going to be my list of what I think are the most badass cars to ever exist. Obviously, there are a lot of cars missed out from the list. If you want to see a part 2, let me know down in the comments below. But I'll tell you right now, if I ever made a part 2, there might be other cars that I would put in personal operatives. There might be other cars where I think are cooler than the 959 and the 850. But I'll tell you this right now, there is no car on this planet that I think, and there is no car that will ever be on this planet that I will ever think will be cooler than the Buick GNX. To be fair, I don't think there's gonna be any car on the planet that's gonna be cooler than any cars over here, because if everything turns electric, that's not cool anymore. I don't think electric cars are cool at all. That's just sad. But anyway, hope you guys have a great day. Remember to stay safe, wash your hands, and blossom out. Peace.
Bro, this song just makes me so happy.
Me too.
Imagine being Asian in the 50s, looking nifty, leather jacket, looking sleek, look like Presley, look so deadly. Got a jukebox back at home, feeling jazzy, turn it on and play it slow, like the movies with the ladies. They so fine. Imagine being Asian in the 50s, looking nifty, leather jacket, looking sleek, look like Presley, look so deadly. Got a jukebox back at home, feeling jazzy, turn it on and play it slow, like the movies with the ladies. They so fine. Sit back, relax in my Bonneville Pontiac. Hold tight all night, cruise to Jacksonville Atlantic. Blonde hair, don't care, look like Leslie Brooks. Pin up girls everywhere with the drop that look. Swing it side to side as we slow dance to the night. When I'll hold your perfect hand and take you out just for a ride. We'll share milkshakes at the diner and rebel at every hour. We can watch a drive-in movie, then have romance in the shower. Sleek my hair, light a lucky cig, lucky strike. Have a bowl at the bowling rig, lucky strike. Get some Elvis, play that J-House rock, jazzy. Spread the groove all around the block, jazzy. Boy, it must be good to be living in the 50s. A time just past the war and just before the hippies. Imagine being rich with just a single dollar. Cars were meant for charming and girls were called my darling. Imagine being Asian in the 50s, looking nifty, leather jacket, looking sleek, look like Presley, look so deadly. Got a jukebox back at home, feeling jazzy, turn it on and play it slow, like the movies with the ladies. They so fine. Imagine being Asian in the 50s, looking nifty, leather jacket, looking sleek, look like Presley, look so deadly. Got a jukebox back at home, feeling jazzy, turn it on and play it slow, like the movies with the ladies. They so fine. Imagine what it felt to be the first Asian rock and roll star. That would be so surreal.